we're living in. Two separate existences.
Welcome back to the Gabriel Speaks podcast, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining me again. This is another episode in my Future Human series where we're going to dive deep into the Dan Burisch story. And I'm going to do my best to convey to you what that story is. Because when you dive really deep, you find there's just endless amounts of information. For nearly a century, we've been chasing objects in the sky and thinking they were alien or ET. And we might have been missing a far more unsettling possibility. That some of these craft actually originate from us. Not from another star system, but from another point in time, which could be from another star system, if that doesn't blow your mind. The hypothesis traces its roots back to 1933 in fascist Italy. With a reported crash and recovery, the event may represent the first documented acquisition of non-conventional technology. From there, this quiet lineage emerges. Classified recoveries, reverse engineering efforts, and what some insiders describe as not crashes, but actual donations. Technology that was deliberately left behind. At the center of this framework is Dan Burisch, who described interaction not with aliens in the traditional sense, but with future or parallel humans. These humans were being constrained by a doctrine of minimal intervention. A rule not unlike the Prime Directive. Observe, report, never overtly alter the timeline. Subtle guidance. In this model, interdimensional contact isn't a separate phenomena. Time travel, higher dimensions, and consciousness converge itself into a point that we're rapidly approaching. And that is the technological singularity. If humanity survives that threshold, it may gain the ability to not just move forward, but backwards. And tightly controlled timelines where intervention is limited, deliberate, and often misunderstood. This episode is going to explore that possibility, not as science fiction, but as a working hypothesis. It's going to reframe UFOs and UAP disclosure and possibly human destiny itself. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more shows and episodes like this. Stay tuned, y'all, because this is going to be a good one.
Initially, I was briefed that J-Rod was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4. I had no idea the truth. Yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. As I said to you before, I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial.
One of the more complex and controversial ideas to come out of the UFO and whistleblower space. It's called the Doctrine of the Convergent Timeline, as described by Dan Burisch. This is not mainstream science. This is not confirmed history. This is a claimed framework, one that attempts to explain human origins, time travel, and extraterrestrial involvement through a branching and recovering model of timelines. What's really compelling is not whether it's true, but how internally consistent the narrative is and how it overlaps with recurring themes across UFO lore, genetics, and long-term survival scenarios. What is the convergent timeline? According to Burisch, time does not behave as a single straight line. Instead, timelines can branch due to catastrophic events or technological interference, diverge for long periods, and in rare cases, attempt to reconverge toward a stable outcome. The doctrine of the convergent timeline suggests that our present timeline is being interfered with because it represents a critical junction, a point where multiple futures either stabilize or end completely. The catastrophe that split humanity. In Burisch's account, the original split begins with a catastrophic planetary event in humanity's future. The exact cause kind of varies depending on the retelling. But to some, environmental collapse, nuclear conflict, or a cascading technological disaster could cause this event. What matters is the result. Human civilization fractures. And there's two primary survival paths going forward. One is to get off world. Two is subterranean survival. Not aliens in the classic sense, but us. Far down different evolutionary roads. Let's talk about the ones that went off world, the Orions. One branch of humanity that leaves Earth entirely come to be known as the Orions. They migrate deep into space, with accounts often placing them in regions associated with the Orion complex. Over long periods, the group maintains a more recognizable human morphology. It retains technological advantage, and it develops strong time navigation and observational capabilities. In Burisch's framework, the beings are often described as tall, human-like, highly advanced, less emotionally expressive, but still recognizably human. They are sometimes portrayed as observers or stewards, deeply concerned with preventing certain catastrophic outcomes. Not out of altruism, but survival necessity. If the past collapses, their future collapses with it. Now, the second group becomes known as the Zeta Reticulan line. The second branch is a little more disturbing. They don't leave Earth. Instead, they retreat underground for survival for thousands and thousands of years. According to Burisch, this prolonged subterranean existence produces dramatic biological changes. Underground survival and morphological change could very well happen. Living underground for millennia would impose intense selective pressures. No sunlight, limited resources, confined environments, and reliance on technology over biology for survival. Over time, Burisch claims this results in enlarged craniums to support neurological processing, reduced musculature, thinner frames, loss of pigmentation, large, light-sensitive eyes, and a reduced reproductive capacity. So in other words, the classic gray morphology. In this doctrine, the beings associated with Zeta Reticuli are not extraterrestrials at all. They are future humans, so biologically altered that they appear alien to us. Why come back? Well, here's the key motivation for the Zetas coming back in time. According to Burisch, the Zeta Reticulan line is genetically unstable. It suffers from reproductive collapse, and in its time, it's facing extinction. So they cannot survive without some form of intervention. The solution they come up with is temporal recursion, returning to earlier points in the timeline to study baseline human genetics, attempt hybridization, and manipulate key events to ensure their survival. This is why, in the Doctrine, abduction narrative focused so heavily on reproduction, genetics, and monitoring. It's not conquest, it's desperation for survival. This is where the Doctrine becomes unstable, with timeline interference and ethical conflict. By interfering with the past, the Zeta Reticulans risk preventing their own emergence, altering the convergent point, or creating paradoxes that collapse entire branches. Now, the Orion-associated humans, according to Burisch, oppose excessive interference. They favor minimal influence, guiding outcomes without destabilizing causality. This creates a temporal conflict, not a war of weapons, but of outcomes. With all this going on, why does our timeline matter now? Burisch repeatedly emphasized that our present era is a convergence window, a narrow band where environmental decisions, technological development, AI, nuclear risk, and genetic engineering are all going to have a determining factor in whether humanity stabilizes or it fractures again. In this doctrine, UFO presence increases during convergence periods, not because aliens suddenly appear, but because the future is attempting to anchor itself. Look, you don't have to believe the Dan Burisch timeline to find this doctrine fascinating. What matters is that it reframes aliens as consequences, not invaders. It places responsibility back on human decision-making, and it treats the future as fragile, not fixed. Whether metaphor, misdirection, or something else entirely, the doctrine of the convergent timeline forces a sobering question. If humanity survives, what will we become? And if we don't, who comes back to fix it? And I want to thank Brian Jackson from theburisharchive.com for this wonderful graphic.
Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean, absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses, and we know, us flatlanders, about left, right, and we know about forward, back, but we have never heard of up-down. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. When the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. Makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. His friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, for heaven's sake, what's happened to you? And the poor square has to say, well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up. Well, show us. Where is that third dimension? Point to it. And the poor square will be unable to comply.
Intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
You've got the potential for a covert agreement where people are benefiting from the status quo that is non-public. The potential for misdeeds having occurred and the desire to cover up misdeeds. Seeing that non-disclosure of uncomfortable aspects of reality is a universal constant across cultures and across time. Like, you don't want the adversary to know what you know, and so on. So profound and impactful. And as Peter Thiel sort of alluded, there may be technology with unknown ramification, and if you let that out there, it could have a significantly detrimental effect. A realization of angels and aliens. Realization of angels and aliens.
Short answer, because angels and demons of the Bible are real. They are the extraterrestrial time travelers. All the stories in the Bible are real. Angels and demons, Paradise Lost, John Milton and Lucifer and Satan is real. They're all real. They're all coming back. It's all true. And I know because of the physics I'm getting, it's exactly what they said it was going to happen. It's all happening. These guys, the CIA themselves, they're not in charge. What happened to me in 1953, the computer science was going to begin to meet these guys. It happened exactly on cue. There's a higher intelligence. They're more advanced than we are, and they've mastered time travel. I'm working on the equations of time travel. That's what I'm doing. That's what all this stuff is. That's what they're doing at Lawrence Livermore now.
Here at the Lawrence Livermore lab, this is now officially the fastest supercomputer in the world.
On one of the benchmarks that we ran that tested, it was about 1.7 exaflops.
That means El Capitan can perform 1.7 quintillion math problems per second.
Today, scientists aren't limited to watching nature do amazing and weird things. They can engineer systems using these properties. They can make something be delocalized, neither exactly in one place nor the other, nor exactly in two places at once, what physicists call a superposition. They can entangle two things such that neither is independently real, and only their whole combination has an independent reality. They can even tunnel or quantum leap something through a barrier and have it appear on the other side as if by magic. In classical computers, information is at its most basic level a bit, either a 0 or 1 state.
That's like your light switch being on or off, or more likely in a computer, it's a magnetic domain that's oriented up or down. When you're talking about a quantum bit, you now not only have something that's analogous to 0 and 1, up and down, but you also have the ability to be in superpositions of up and down.
Quantum bits, or qubits, can not only be in 2 states at the same time, they can share or entangle their states across many qubits, increasing their computing power.
A lot of the quantum computing that goes on in this lab is trying to use electronic circuits to emulate the same behavior as atoms.
We've become able to make pieces of metal that also have these discrete sets of energy states, at least when we make them cold enough.
If you freeze some metals colder than the vacuum of space, they become superconducting.
But I would call it a macroscopic quantum state. The idea is that when you get cold enough, all these electrons start moving in lockstep, all doing exactly the same thing, right down to the quantum mechanical level. So even though it's a huge macroscopic number of electrons, it's behaving like one electron going around an atom. And if they overlap enough, then you can get what's called tunneling, where they will just quantum mechanically, quantum leap, whatever you will, that's a term, jump from one side to the other.
This quantum tunneling is what gives the qubit its nonlinear energy level.
It's true that the simple ideas that you might have about time travel would lead to some paradoxes, but you have to decide, does that truly mean that time travel is simply logically impossible? Or is there some way around it? Could we possibly do better? Well, you can do a little bit better, and this seems like a cop-out, but the basic rule that has to be obeyed is that there are no paradoxes. What this means is that even if you could travel into the past, what you could not do is change it. And I really want to emphasize this, that as far as we know, even if it were possible to go back into the past, nothing that you could do once you got there could affect the series of events that we know happened. So if you can travel back into the past, you can't mess with it because we know it already happened. It's different from the future. We think that for the future, we can make choices. You can decide today what to have for dinner tomorrow night. We do not think that you can decide today what to have had for dinner last night. If time travel were possible, it would necessarily imply a form of predestination. What you were able to do in your own personal future is limited if that personal future happens in the past. I mean, imagine that I can hop in a time machine and go back to a moment before my parents left. What would stop me from killing them or somehow stopping them from meeting? And the answer is something. What's not possible is that you can prevent them from having you, because we know that already happened. The amount of time that will elapse that you will feel on your wristwatch depends on the gravitational field that you're in. I already told you it depends on how fast you move through the universe, but it's also true that how much gravity you feel affects the rate of time. Roughly speaking, time moves more slowly in a strong gravitational field than in a weak gravitational field. So the point is that this singularity is not a place in space. The singularity is your future. The singularity is a moment in time. When you're here, you're just going to the future. You're not going left or right. You could just not do anything at all. But you will inevitably age into the singularity. In special relativity, there's no absolute notion of simultaneity. There are light cones, but it's still true. You inevitably march forward. In general relativity, the light cones start tilting. They're affected by gravity. So a brand new possibility opens up. Time travel is not you hop in your sled or your phone booth and you dematerialize in a puff of smoke and you appear at some other moment of time. That's crazy talk. What it would really be like is you hop in a rocket ship, you hop in some vehicle, You travel on the right path through the universe that takes you to a sufficiently strong gravitational field that you can be flung backward in time. At no time do you disappear, you do not teleport. It's not that your consciousness is suddenly imported into a past version of yourself. It's that you get in the seat and you push the rocket in the right direction. As a time machine, it's a rocket. It can go someplace, and if the gravitational field is arranged in the right way, it could visit the past. Can we warp space-time that much? Einstein, by allowing space and time to be flexible and dynamical, has opened the door. He said, here's a way we can at least imagine building a time machine. So very few people took up the challenge, but in the late 80s, early 90s, attempts were actually made to do this. How could you actually do it? You need to bend space-time so much that you could travel on what physicists call a closed time-like curve.
Credible time travel model must resolve the singularity problem. Failure to do so results in paradox, narrative collapse, or multiverse speculation. The Burisch account, regardless of its ultimate validity, provides a useful constraint framework. According to that framework, the future is not expansive. It's degraded. Human population density is reduced. Genetic diversity is limited. And biological resilience is compromised. Technological advancement continues, but under pressure of survival. Now, this matters because it implies that time travel, if achieved, emerges after collapse, not before it. In this model, the singularity is not a point of ascension. It is a causal lock, a convergence where AI, climate thresholds, nuclear and biological risk, quantum computing, and more intersect. Beyond this point, macro-scale outcomes stabilize, not because they're optimal, but because alternatives fail to produce observers. The timeline becomes non-branching and resistant to correction. Temporal intervention, therefore, is only possible upstream of that lock. This reframes historical UFO activity. Early 20th century recovery events, Cold War nuclear monitoring, genetic and reproductive focus reported in close encounter and abduction events. These are not exploratory missions. They are containment actions. Limited in scope, risk-averse, and constrained by feedback instability. Burisch's description of future humans, frail, environmentally adapted, emotionally muted, aligns with a civilization shaped by bottlenecks rather than abundance. Such a civilization would not risk large-scale temporal alterations. It would attempt probability management, small nudges, selective observation, minimal disclosure. Failure modes in this system are expected. Crafts are not anomalies. They are artifacts of constrained operation. Paradox does not arise under this model because the timeline already includes these interventions. casualty is self-consistent. Observed history is not modified. It is essentially closed-loop stabilized. The future exists because the past unfolded exactly this way, including interference. Now, disclosure presents a separate risk vector. If pre-singularity population internalize the belief that the future is fixed, survival is conditional, and history is monitored, then behavioral collapse becomes likely. Determinism undermines agency. Agency destabilizes outcomes. Therefore, ambiguity is not deception, it's containment. Singularity marks the end of any editable history, and UFO activity increases as temporal flexibility decreases. The UFO phenomena may not indicate power or control. They may indicate urgency. The future is not visiting us because it is advanced. It may be here because this is the last point where intervention still works.
He crashed in '63, from what I understand,
What was that?
outside of Kingman,
Okay.
Kingman, Arizona.
There's just a very small handful of UFO crash retrieval reports in the United States that have that kind of verification to them.
So we decided to find that information ourselves. Going to the Mojave Museum of History in Kingman, combing through old newspaper clippings, sketches, and even redacted government documents allegedly detailing the crash from those who were there, including Fritz Werner.
We now know him to be Arthur Stansel.
And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona.
After getting off the bus, as recreated here, the scientists were taken to an even more remote location. They had no idea exactly where they were or what they were about to see.
I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen 2 bodies inside this tent, 2 alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill.
Like a skull cap?
Yes, like a skull cap.
4 feet tall and wearing a silver metallic suit. Surrounded by military police, the workers conducted their studies in the dead of night. It doesn't say how long they were there, but when they got back on the bus, an Air Force colonel who was in charge of the operation made them take an oath to keep this a secret. 20 years later, Stansel came forward, signing this affidavit, allegedly confirming what he saw. Then 50 years later, another secret about the crash was released by former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, between him and a senior United States government member whose name has been redacted, claiming people would be slack-jawed if word got out about what they know, writing the U.S. government seized the Kingman UFO.
These craft are scooped up, taken to various Air Force bases, scientific labs, and studied intently.
I would enter into the clean sphere, and I was not supposed to communicate with the J-Rod at all. I was not supposed to know his name. The reality is we were communicating from the time that I entered into the ambassadorial suite external to the clean sphere, talking back and forth freely. I could hear whatever he was projecting at me from thought, and he could very clearly hear what I was thinking, the gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall, He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin. Large head in comparison to torso, so the ratio of the cranial to the torso area would be larger than in what we would call a modern human being. Large, bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out, so it looked like a large pupil, basically. When you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, large length. 4 very thin, sinuous fingers, nails. He was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy. And that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would say our feet would be. He was unclothed 4. And he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two opercula, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. Smarter than me. Smarter than me by a long range. The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind.
Was that right?
He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with 3-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. So that if I was not understanding the script, I would understand it as a child learns groups.
What if UFO history isn't about aliens at all? What if it's about us? In the 30s, Mussolini seized control of Italy and slowly but surely changed it into a fascist state. A state where little can get outside of the government's control. In the early 30s, long before Roswell, long before the Cold War, there are credible reports that something unusual occurred in Italy, that a craft was recovered and studied in secret. This wasn't post-war panic, and it wasn't radar misidentification. This was pre-World War II. If even part of those accounts are true, then we're forced to ask an uncomfortable question. Why would advanced technology appear before the technological explosion of the modern era, unless it came from the future? 1947, Roswell becomes the official starting line of the UFO story. But maybe Roswell wasn't the beginning. Maybe it was a course correction. If future humans have the ability to travel backward in time, even imperfectly, then early crashes wouldn't be surprising, they'd be expected. Prototype missions, unstable platforms, and learning curves. The main point is if you're a future civilization attempting to alter or stabilize your own past, you certainly wouldn't announce yourself. You'd observe, you'd intervene subtly, and sometimes you would fail. Through the 50s and 60s, sightings exploded. Not random, not evenly distributed. They seemed to cluster around nuclear facilities, missile silos, and weapons testing sites. Why? If these are future humans, the nuclear weapons aren't just dangerous to us, they're dangerous to the timeline. A nuclear exchange doesn't just end lives, it collapses futures. And if your existence depends on preventing that collapse, intervention becomes logical, not altruistic. Then come the abduction accounts. In most accounts, the beings described aren't monstrous. They're humanoid, smaller, frailer. Large eyes, reduced musculature, and emotional detachment. These are traits that are consistent with a species that evolved in artificial environments with genetic bottlenecks, possibly under catastrophic conditions. Any reproductive focus becomes a recurring theme. Why? Because if your future population is failing, you don't conquer the past, you borrow from it. By the 1980s and 90s, the phenomena seems to shift again. Craft performance seems to improve. Maneuvers defy known physics. And observers report time distortion, missing hours, even altered perception. This isn't just movement through space. It's movement through causality. And even if future humans are operating under strict constraints, limited jumps, limited interference, it would explain why the phenomenon feels inconsistent, fragmented, and incomplete. Like a system that works, but not perfectly. Let's talk about the modern era. We have Navy pilots, sensor fusion, multiple corroborating systems. No longer just witnesses, instrumental encounters. And suddenly, the language changes. Not aliens, not visitors, but non-human intelligence. A phrase that carefully avoids saying extraterrestrial, because future humans wouldn't be extraterrestrial. They'd be us, displaced in time. Now ask yourself this: why does disclosure feel slow? Why does it feel managed? Why do revelations arrive only after decades? Because revealing time travel isn't just about technology. It's about destabilizing causality. Once the public understands that the future can reach into the past, then every decision changes. Free will becomes very complicated. History becomes malleable, and accountability becomes blurred. So maybe the real secret isn't that we're not alone. Maybe the real secret is that we're not early. That humanity survives, but barely. and that what we call UFOs are echoes of that survival, reaching backward, trying to ensure they still come to exist. Not gods, not angels, not invaders, descendants, trying not to disappear. If this theory is wrong, it's still worth asking the questions. And if it's right, then UFO history isn't just about contact. It's about continuity.
Do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
The biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human.
They describe these crafts, these crash crafts, as donations.
Okay, so I don't like to characterize necessarily where they came from. They're definitely some kind of non-human sentience, but it is true, believe it or not, we've recovered the vehicles. And we actually have physical proof, and I was actually partially cleared into some of those activities. It was beyond oral testimony provided to me. I actually had partial access to the data and actually read the intelligence reports resulting from those programs.
With your own eyes,
Correct.
You saw it.
Yes.
It is commonly talked about that what we are getting, even when we weaponize it, is a donation.
And we're not the only ones that have had a crash. Potentially just to see who is stronger. And that's a scary thing. It's a multi-level chess game, and they have to sit back and go, what is the reason they just happen to have had a crash here?
He calls them donations. That possibly they're doing this on purpose to help advance our society or something. Give us little breadcrumbs, if you will.
The UFO cargo cult, right? And obviously, Tyler and James view these parts as donate. They call it the donation site.
About a craft of unknown origin that our government finally accessed the inside.
That occurred let's say in a congressional facilities.
For decades, the public conversation around UFOs has centered on a single question. What are they? But there's another question, one that may be more consequential and far less comfortable. Who controls the technology? If we accept the growing body of testimony, historical reporting, and insider accounts indicating that the U.S. military and its partners began recovering crashed anomalous vehicles as early as the 1930s, then the implications are significant. Because recovery is only the first step. What follows that is analysis, exploitation, and ultimately attempts at replication. According to multiple sources across decades, these recovered vehicles and materials did not remain within traditional military structures. Instead, they were moved into deeply compartmentalized programs, often referred to as legacy programs, operating outside the standard oversight. Programs so restricted that even senior government officials and elected leaders have been denied access. In many accounts, the technical work itself was shifted to private industry. Aerospace contractors, defense firms, and research laboratories operating under the highest levels of security. This arrangement matters. Private industry is not bound by the same transparency requirements as government agencies. It can retain discoveries indefinitely, bury failures, and continue work across generations without any public accountability. If reverse engineering efforts began nearly a century ago, then even slow, incremental progress would compound over time. Decades of trial and error, breakthroughs quietly classified, failures quietly absorbed, and successes quietly folded into black projects. Under that framework, the idea that some of the objects we now label as UFOs or UAPs could represent advanced human-made systems is no longer extraordinary. It becomes a plausible outcome of long-term, secret technological development. This does not suggest that every unidentified object in the sky belongs to us, but it does suggest that the public narrative, one that treats all advanced sightings as unexplained or external, may be incomplete. There's another critical dimension to this story: legality. If these legacy programs operated without proper congressional authorization, without lawful oversight, and without transparent funding, then exposure would not simply reveal advanced technology. It would expose decades of constitutional violations, misappropriated funds, and a parallel system of governance operating beyond democratic control. In that context, secrecy becomes less about national security and more about institutional survival. Because disclosure would not only force answers about what we recovered, it would force accountability for how those programs were hidden, who authorized them, and who benefited from them.
They were brought into an area where there were 3 flying saucers hovering off the floor, no landing gear underneath, basically just floating. And there was the smallest of the 3 vehicles. It had a rolling staircase in front of it. You could climb up, you could look inside, see the components. They had a videotape playing on a TV next to it that showed one actually flying around doing various things. They had a podium with a 3-star general that got up and described the capabilities of this vehicle, and 2 other larger versions of it that were behind it, much larger. You can tell by the size of the door going inside. The synthetic vision system, which involved a number of cameras.
From Italy to current day, one thing is clear. There is activity that we cannot explain that's going on. And we've had many people report on the fact that we have reverse engineered craft. Now, would it make more sense for that craft to be a reverse engineered alien craft or a reverse engineered human craft? Who knows? But if we don't consider this hypothesis, I don't think that we're being fair. Until we have a crystal clear picture of what's going on, and I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, that we must consider all possibilities. And I would bet if you ran the numbers, it's actually more likely that this is time-traveling humans than it is aliens. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. I'll see you next time on the Gabriel Speaks podcast.